Masechet Yoma Daf 49. We're actually right in the middle of a discussion about holding things with one's left hand. This was a question posed to Rav Sheshat. Can you carry the blood in one's left hand? Usually, all the avodot is supposed to be in the right hand. And Rav Sheshat's answer, surprisingly, was yes, it's okay if you do it with your left hand. And how does he know? From our Mishnah, which taught that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur carries the ketoret in the left hand because he's carrying the coals in the right hand. So therefore, if that's allowed, then so too, carrying the blood must be fine. Okay, that's where we left it, but we are going to challenge this opinion and overturn it. From the following baraita: Meti zar ve'onen shikor uba'amum bekabala v'holacha b'zrika pasul. The first half of this baraita is not relevant to us directly, but we'll get to the next part. Zar, a non-kohen. Onen, someone who had a death of a close member of his family on that day of burial. Shikor, someone drunk. Ba'amum, someone who has a blemish. Bekabala v'holacha cannot do any of these things. They can do shechita, right? Just like a non-kohen can do shechita, but receiving the blood and taking it and throwing it on the mizbeach, no, they cannot do that. And also, v'chen yosheb, v'chen simol, pasul. So here's the relevant one. If you're sitting down, obviously you can't be walking the blood when you're sitting down, but maybe you could do zirika while you're sitting. No, you got to do it standing, and you can't use your left hand. So this is holacha, is what we were asking about, and this is left hand is pasul. So this is a explicit baraita against using the left hand for carrying the blood. Tiyubta. So that's it. This is a firm rejection of Rav Sheshat. You can ask, well, what about the Kohen Gadol holding the ketoret in the left hand? So he has to say something like that's an exception, because Torah actually says specifically that you have to carry the coals. It's not like no one else can do it. And so there's no option. And you're going to have to carry something with the left hand. And we said for practical reasons, the coals are heavier. So yes, Ketoret is an exception, but you can't learn from that to anything else. And certainly not when you have a Braita. Okay, so this is kind of surprising that Rav Sheshat didn't know this Braita. Now, it does happen that Amoraim don't know every Braita. The Braitas were not collected in a specific collection. We assume they knew all the Mishnayot, but I thought sometimes they learned, I didn't know that Braita. Thank you for telling me. But this Braita in particular, we know that Rav Sheshat knew. How do we know that? From another discussion in which Rav Sheshat himself quoted it. Rav Sheshat hu de'otva. He used it as a challenge to another rabbi. Because one time he told the announcer of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda was the sage, and whenever the sage was giving a big lecture, it wasn't polite for him, respectful to him to have to scream to everybody else. So he had an amorah, an announcer that would say, and also not the announcer also fielded questions. If you had a question for the lecturer, you would ask the announcer, and the announcer would then ask. So when Rav Chisda was teaching, Rav Sheshat presented the following question. They asked Rav Chisda, is a non-Kohen allowed to carry blood? Amar le, keshera, this is okay. Mikra mesaya'eni, vayishchatu ha'pasach vayizrechu ha'kohanim miyadam, v'halviyim mafshitim. This is a pasuk in Divrei Yamim that's describing how they did Korban Pesach in the time of King Yoshiyahu. And it says that they did the slaughtering. Who's they? Well, it doesn't have to be a Kohen. And then the Kohanim threw the blood miyadam. They took the blood from their hands, and the Leviim would be mafshitim. So you see that the Kohanim received the blood from someone else, a non-Kohen, a Levi, right? And so, or maybe even not a Levi. So since it says that the Kohanim received the blood from someone else, that's Rav Chisda's proof that a non-Kohen is allowed to do holacha and bring the blood from the place of shechita to the mizbeach. All right, that's a pretty good proof. But when he said that, Rav Sheshat was in the audience. Umotiv Rav Sheshat, and Rav Sheshat said, hold on. He told the announcer, ask him this question from this baraita, the one that we just quoted. Zar ve'onen shikor ba'almum be'kabala b'holachab zrika pasul. V'chen yoshev v'chen simol pasul. Now the first half is relevant. Zar, a non-kohen, cannot do holacha. So how can you just tell me, you just gave the answer that a zar can do holacha? Okay, so It doesn't matter what the answer is. The point is that Rav Sheshet knew this baraita. So how could Rav Sheshet say earlier that you're allowed to carry the blood with the left hand when it contradicts the baraita, and he knew the baraita? The answer is it must be in different chronological order. The story we just read from Rav Chisda happened later, happened first. And then later, since he heard it, he said the halacha first, before up above, that the left hand is allowed, and then he heard this baraita. Once he heard the baraita, he changed his mind. After he changed his mind, and he knew the baraita, then he challenged Rav Chisda. So that's the order. So you're right. He did accept the baraita, and he only knew of it after someone presented to them, and then he challenged Rav Chisda. Good. Now Rav Chisda kera amar. Hold on. Now back to the subject matter. Rav Chisda quoted a pasuk in Divrei Yamim that said it's allowed. So pasuk is higher authority than the baraita. So how could we reject him? The answer to that problem is Ta'abud Maaseh Itzteba. Those people, those Leviim, those non-Kohanim who were carrying the blood, they weren't carrying the blood. They acted simply as tables. They were just holding it, or like benches. The idea is that there was a lot of blood that needed to be poured. In the meantime, they said, here, Levi, just hold the blood. They weren't walking it. They were just standing still and acting like a bench to hold on to it. So you cannot actually learn from that pasuk. Pasuk doesn't say that they carried it. It just said that the Kohanim received it from them. And so now we see everyone agrees with this baraita, and left hand is not allowed, and the non-zad is not allowed in holacha. Question?
Yeah, Rabbi, perhaps because I'm biased, I'm lefty myself, but what's the big idea with left? I mean, it just seems a little bit strange, no? I mean,
yeah, I guess it's coming like an army formation, right? Everybody has to be the same. Everything in the Bet HaMikdash is standardized, follows a protocol. So we go with the majority, and Yamin is all over Tanakh, all over most cultures considered the stronger hand because that's the majority. So I think in the Bet HaMikdash we like everything to be standardized.
fair enough.
Okay. So, I mean, even now, most of the utensils are made for righties. I think there is a company that makes scissors and things for lefties, but they don't do as much business. Okay, Rav Papa, Chafan Haberov Natan Letoch Ofnav Mahu. So Rav Papa has a question. If what you have to say if two Kohanim. Well, if one Kohen, he wants to help out the Kohen Gadol, right? So one Kohen will do will take the ketoret from the big pan. Remember, there's a pan with a lot of ketoret, and you have to take 2 handfuls, and then that Kohen puts it in the hand of a second Kohen, the Kohen Gadol. So the Kohen Gadol didn't actually take it from the pan, but he did hold it in his hands. That's the question. So do we need that he's holding 2 handfuls of ketoret? And he did that. Or do we need that the Kohen Gadol also has to take it? He has to be the one to originally take it from the pan and also hold it. Why would you think that? Because the pasuk describes starts with the word velakach. Now the word velakach we know is going on the beginnings that says he has to take coals. Fine. But that word velakach, do we transfer it? Does it cover the whole pasuk? And even later on, it says, so the word vehebi certainly has to bring the ketoret into the bet parochet, but the word velakach, maybe it applies to the whole pasuk, and just like he has to take coals, the Kohen Gadol also has to take the ketoret and then bring it. So that's the question. If it does or not, maybe velakach is only on the first half of the pasuk and not on the second half, and then it would be okay. Teko, we leave that question up in the air. Okay, now another question, somewhat similar. But this one is he's a first generation Amorah. Rav Papa is a 5th generation, so these are not in chronological order. And here's this question. Hafan vamet. The Kohen Gadol does hafina, right? He has this, and so he puts it in the ladle, and he's ready to bring it into Kodesh Kodashim. Maybe he's very nervous. I don't know. He dies on the spot. Hazit. Okay, so now another Kohen takes his place. מהו שייכנס אחר בחפינתו? Can the new Kohen Gadol B, pick up that spoon, that ladle, and bring it in? Now, he didn't measure it out with his hands, and everybody's hands are different. Is it okay? Since someone did chafina, so that's enough. Chafina was done. And then keep going? Or does he have to do it again with his own hands? That's the Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's question. Okay, we're not going to answer this question for a while. We're going to go into a little bit of a tangent because we have a comment on the question. Amar Rabbi Chanina, boreh she'alat harishonim. Rabbi Chanina commented, he's about a contemporary, but Rabbi Chanina is a little bit older. So Rabbi Chanina says, come and see the question of the early generation. Now, what does he mean? I think he means something like, this is an old question. He's giving him a compliment, right? But it sounds like he's saying, he's calling Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi the old generation, right? Oh, see, the elder asked this question. We also had this question, right? So he's like, oh, what a good question. I'm glad we asked it because now we see the elder Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi asked it too. So that's his comment. Now, we're going to spend the whole page now talking about that comment. Lememra de Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi kashish. Does that mean that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is older than Rabbi Chanina? It's not true. He wasn't older. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi li hitir Rabbi Chanina lishtot shachalayim b'Shabbat. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, I asked a question of Rabbi Chanina, a halachic question. Are you allowed to drink cress juice on Shabbat? Cress juice is good for medicinal purposes, although some people like to drink it just because it tastes good. And so he asked him this question. He said it's allowed. Now, what do you see from here? Usually, you don't say li hitir. If li hitir means he asked a question from his rabbi, from the elder, right, from the authority, and he said it's okay. So from that language, it's evident that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was younger than Rabbi Chanina. So why did Rabbi Chanina say, "Oh, this is the great question from the elder"? Okay, now that we only quoted this story here about the cress juice just to show the language that he said, oh, he is my authority. But now that you mentioned cress juice on Shabbat, right, let's analyze that. What was the question? Lishtot? Peshita. Why was he asking to? Of course you could drink cress juice. Ditnan. Mishnah Masechet Shabbat says, although you're not allowed to take medicine on Shabbat, something that's specifically used for medicine, you can't because you might come to crush it. But if there's an item, a food item that people generally eat, or something that some people generally drink, and then you are drinking it or eating it for medicinal purposes, that's okay, right? If you want to have prunes, right? So for medicinal purposes, that's okay because some people like to eat prunes just because they like. If you're drinking orange juice for vitamin C, it's okay because people drink it anyway. So same thing with cress juice. You don't have to ask a question. Everybody knows this Mishnah. So what was he talking about? Ella lishchok v'lishtot shachalayim b'Shabbat. Must be his question was, can I actually grind the cress and make cress juice on Shabbat? So that's a melacha. So that must have been his question. Wait, is that his question? If it's a life-threatening emergency, obviously it's allowed. If it's not a life-threatening emergency, you can't do melacha on Shabbat, right? I mean, I don't care if you're just a little sick. You can't violate Shabbat for such a thing. That's the melacha d'oraita. So that can't be the question. Is le'olam de'ika sakanta v'achikame ba'yale. So it must be the question as follows. We know it was a case when it was life-threatening. He needed the cress juice. He had a life-threatening emergency. But the question was as follows: Mi masya denechol alay b'Shabbata or la masya v'la nechol alay b'Shabbata. It's actually a medical question. Does cress juice help? If it helps, then I can violate Shabbat and do it. It's life-threatening. Or does it not help? Right? If it doesn't help at all, just because someone's life is threatened, doesn't mean you can just go and do melacha that's not helping him. You can't just go, make a casserole for fun. So that's because actually a medical question. Does it work or not? It's related to a legal question. Okay, now, if it's a medical question, why didn't he go ask a doctor, right? Why are you asking Rabbi Chanina? Rabbi Chanina? And says, Mishum debaki b'refuoto. Oh, he was an expert in medicine. So this is, you see where we are. We're a question about a question about a question here. We're way off on a tangent. So Rabbi Chanina says, no one ever asked me about a wound that was given to a person by a white mule, and he recovered. In other words, I've never seen anyone recover if a mule like this hit him. So that shows he's an expert in medicine, that he knows that there's no recovery, there's no way to treat a kick from a white mule. All right, I don't know if that shows he's such a great doctor that he said, but okay, sometimes it's good to know that there's no treatment for this. So don't even bother trying. Okay, now question on that. Hold on, really? We see people that are kicked by a white mule and they're fine, right? And they do live. So what is not, that's not even true. The Bichanina says this. Is he really such an expert? Emma v'hayat. Don't say hayat masculine, talking about him, but rather hayat feminine, referring to the wound. That the wound does not heal. It's gonna leave a scar. Hold on. We see that people are kicked with them by a mule, and the wound heals. So even that's not true. The answer is bisumkan inhu v'chivaran resh karayu kamrin. And we're talking about the mules that they're red and their legs are white. The tops of the legs are white. If you see one like that, like this, here's white here and reddish here, those are really wild, and you're not going to recover from that. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Chanina said, and this is apparently true. And so you see he's an expert in medicine, and that's why they asked him. All right, anyway, why did we get onto all this? Mikol makom, shema mina Rabbi Chanina kashish. Nevertheless, you see that he is the elder because Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi asked him this question of halacha / medicine. And so why would Rabbi Chanina say, oh, what a good question from the elder? We misunderstood those words. What he meant is that this question that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is saying is like the question of elders. He's the younger one and says, oh, this question you're asking? Oh, you're asking a question like, I heard this question when I was young. This is an old question. Okay, so now we flip it around. We're going to see yet a third interpretation of this. But anyway, now a question about Rabbi Chanina. Would Rabbi Chanina really say, this is a good question? See, for Rabbi Chanina, the answer to this question would have been obvious. So he wouldn't have said it's a good question. How do we know that? We're going to quote two statements of Rabbi Chanina. When you put them together, you see he'll have an answer to the question. Okay, what was the question to begin with? If a Kohen Gadol dies, right? He does chafina and then he dies, and next Kohen Gadol wants to take the same, or does he have to go back and remeasure using his own? That was the question. Now, is this really? It's not a good question for Rabbi Chanina because Rabbi Chanina befar velo bedamo shel par. This is regarding the blood of the bull, right? The pasuk says bezot yavo befar ben bakar. So he has to bring par ben bakar into the kodesh. Now, obviously, he doesn't bring the bull into kodesh. He's bringing the blood of the bull, right? But the question is here, befar. Now, if let's say the one kohen does shechita on the par, and now you have the blood there. The guy's mixing the blood, and then he dies or he becomes pasul. Can the second kohen take that blood and use it? Rabbi Chanina said no. Befar means it has to be his par that he did shechita, and not b'damo shel par. He can't just take the blood of someone else's par. So that's Rabbi Chanina's statement, right? That's kind of similar to our question, but we're adding yet another factor. Rabbi Chanina ketoret shechafanaha. Kodem shechitat par lo asa velo kilum. You have to do it in this order. If you do ketoret first and then you do shechita on the par, no good. You have to do shechita first, right? Remember he did the vidui on the par, he did shechita, he collected the blood, he gave it to the kohen who's sitting on the fourth step. He's still mixing it this whole time. And then he gets ketur. Has to be in that order, otherwise it's no good. So what do you see when you put these two things together? If Kohen A did shechita and he did the chafina and then he dies, so now what? The second Kohen, we said here, he can't use that blood anymore, right? Sorry, got to take that blood out. He has to go get another pod and do shechita. And he has to, after he does that, he has to do ketoret. He can't rely on the chafina that the first one did because he has to do it in order. So in other words, he has to go all the way back to the beginning. So it's clear from according to the Bichanina that if the Kohen Gadol dies after he does Chafina, the second Kohen has to go all the way back and do Chafina again. He has to do part again, Chafina again. So this wouldn't be a question for him. So why did he say, oh, that's a good question. That's the question that the elder said. So rather, it must be he was saying it's a good question, not according to his own opinion, but according to another opinion. He said, if Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is asking this question, he must hold the assumption, not what I think, but rather the other opinion. We're going to see there's a big machloket about this. That bepad, when it says you have to bring the cow in, the bull in, it means just the blood of it. Even if someone else did shechita and he did a good job, so fine, you could take someone else's blood that he already did shechita on. So he must think that. That's why he's asking the question. And according to that opinion, he's saying, oh, yes, there were elders who follow that opinion. Even though I disagree, he's following elders. So you know what? He's explaining that he's not just saying it's a good question, he's explaining that question follows an assumption that he doesn't agree with, but that other people do. Okay, now that we discussed the comment on the question, now let's get to the question itself. According to the Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and all those who say that you don't have to go back and do the blood, right? You could use the previous Kohen's blood that he prepared. What about the chafina? Does he have to do it again or not? Amar Papa says it depends. I chofen chozer bechofen, habero nichnas b'chafinato. Taha mekayema chafina. There's another machloket that we're also going to see in the next page that says, in 2 paragraphs. The question is, how many times do you have to do chafina? You have to do it one time outside. When you have the big pan of a lot of ketoret, he has to bring 2 handfuls and put it in the ladle, because he can't carry it. It's not practical. The question is, when he goes into the Kodesh Kodashim, does he have to put it into his hands again and then put it on the coals? Or can he just take that ladle and pour it directly on the coals? So the Papa says, if you say you have to do it again, chofen, and again, chofen inside, then it's okay, because Kohen Gadol B, his friend, will go in and he'll do his own chafina. So chafina was done by the new Kohen Gadol. So that's fine. But the question still stands if you say you don't do a second chafina. That means the first Kohen Gadol did chafina. He died. The second Kohen Gadol didn't get a chance to do chafina. So does he have to? Is that okay, or does he have to go do the original chafina again? So that's the question. He didn't answer it, but at least he answered it according to one opinion. But not everybody agrees with that. Your logic is wrong. It's the opposite logic. If you have to do chafina twice, then it's no good, because Kohen Gadol A, maybe he had big hands. Kohen Gadol B, maybe he has small hands, right? And now you're going to pour it in, it's going to fall all over the place. It's no good. You can't fit it all. Or the other way around, same thing. It's going to be a little more or a little less. So that's for sure no good. The question does still stand if you don't have to do a second one. So the first Kohen, he did chafina with his hands, that's good. Now I'm bringing it in. The second Kohen, it's already pre-measured, he just pours it out, right? He doesn't have to use his hands, so it doesn't matter. Or maybe it does. Maybe he does have to do chafina again. So according to both Rav Papa and this Rav Huna, if you don't have to do chafina a second time, the question stands. If you do have to do chafina a second time, according to Rav Papa, that's fine. It's okay. He doesn't have to do it again. According to Rav Huna, he doesn't. Okay, so that's all. They're not going to answer this question. All we know is that it depends on which opinion you hold regarding the second chafina. So now that we brought that up, we're going to leave that question behind and ask this question itself about the second one. The Hayyale, right? We had a question that we just mentioned. Now we'll go into it. Chofen, chozer v'chofen, or lo? Do you need a second chafina in the Kodesh Kodashim, or is the first one sufficient and you pour directly from the ladle? We're going to try to answer it. Tashema. Kachaita midata. Remember back in the Mishnah, it said, right, the Kohen Gadol measured on his hand, puts it in the ladle, and this is the measurement. These are redundant words. What do you mean this is the measurement? My love, keshem shemidatam bachus, kach midatam bifnim. Must mean that the measurement that you made outside, it's going to stay the same. It's not going anywhere. It's the same measurement inside. And so therefore, you see, there's no need to do another chafina. You already measured it. So that's a proof that you don't have to. Yeah, really? No, maybe that word, that phrase, that this is the measurement, means that if you want to pre-measure, you just make a measuring cup that's exactly this Kohen Gadol's hands, and then you have to put in hands at all, that you can do that. Maybe that's what it means, kachi midata. Or maybe it's coming to emphasize that it can't be any more or any less. Don't think, oh, I'll add more. Make the more the better. No, it has to be that. So that phrase is ambiguous, and therefore we cannot learn anything from it. So let's try again. Tashema. Kesad hu oseh. So now we could quote a braita that gives us detail what the Kohen Gadol does when he goes inside the Kodesh Kodashim and he's carrying the two things, right? So remember, with his right hand he has the coals. With that, he puts it down on the floor, and that remains there. So now he has his two hands free. Now he has one hand free, and the other one is holding the ladle. But here's the thing: he has to put his hands together, and somehow he has to get the ketoret, but while his hands are together, he has to get the ketoret and pour it into his hands. So remember, we said this is a very difficult thing to do. Okay, the point why we bring this is it shows that he does have to do a chafina again in Kodesh Kodashim. So this is a clear proof, and we're going to accept it. Okay, so you understand the proof already, but let's see the details. So you hold it with the tips of his fingers. Some say Yeshua B'Shinav uses his teeth to try to get it into proper place. And he pushes it back with his thumbs, so until it gets between his arms. They mean that the handle will be between his arms. And then he can use his thumbs to manipulate and turn it, or maybe his elbows, to spin it so that it turns over and pours into his hands. And then once it's in his hands, he spreads it over the coals so that it will be slow. In other words, don't spread it out a lot. Make it a heap so that it will take time to burn, and it will last a long time. Other people say, no, the opposite. Spread it out over the coals so that the smoke goes up quickly. You want a big one right away. Okay, so those are opposite things, but we have a nice picture here, right? We see that the handle is somehow, others say that he's going to put his elbows together and that can manipulate better. Anyway, somehow he's going to spin it around and put it back into his hands. And we end off saying that this was the most difficult service ever done in the Beit HaMikdash. Gemara comments, Zohi v'tulot. Wait, this is the only difficult one? This is the most difficult. Melika, we mentioned, right, with the bird, you got to break its neck with your nail. That's hard to do. Kimisa, when you take something that's already cooked and you have to break it off the edges to get exactly a palm full. So those were also difficult. Now, this is one of three things that was very difficult to do. Shema mina, chofen vechozer vechofen, shema mina. Good. After so many tekos, we finally have a conclusion about this question, that yes, the Kohen Gadol has to do a second chafina, put it back into his hands when he gets in to the Kodesh Kodashim. Now, since he does have to do that, now we can go back and we can say that the answer to the previous question depends on the machloket, Rav Papa and Rav Huna. We don't answer between those, but it will just depend on which you assume as the new Kohen after the first one died. Since he's doing his own chafina, that okay? Rav Papa said it's fine, so he doesn't have to do it again. Rav Huna said that no, his hands are different sizes, so he has to go back and do it again. Okay, and last question for today. Ibaya lehu shahat vamet. Mahu sheyikanes ahed bedamo. Mi amrinan befar vafilu bedamo shel par, or dilma befar velo bedamo shel par. Okay, this is getting back to a subject we already brought up. The Gemara is like not in order. It would be nice if it brought this first, and then we could reference it. Okay, but anyway, now we already know what it's about. So if one Kohen does the shechita of the pod, and then he dies, can another Kohen go and bring that same blood that the guy's still mixing, or does he have to do it again? And it depends on how you read this word. This is befad ben bakar. Do you say befad? Afil bedamo shel pod. Befad means it doesn't have to be his own pod. He could just bring the blood of the bull. Or do you say befad means he has to bring his own? It has to be his own. He has to do the one shechita. It really makes sense that he has to do the shechita because not only shechita, he also does the vidui on it. And he says, "I atone for my sins." How can someone else come and say, "Oh, he atoned for his sins on this pod. Okay, now I could bring it. Doesn't he have to do it again?" Okay, maybe not. Maybe he has all the Kohanim in mind, so it's okay. Okay, in any case, that's the question. Rabbi Chanina Omer, befar velo b'damo shel par. Rabbi Chanina says, we quoted him earlier already. He says, no, has to be his part. You got to go back and do it again. Shakish Amar, befar afilo b'damo shel par. He's more lenient. He's no, and just the blood is okay. Doesn't have to be his own part. Rabbi Ameh Amar, befar velo b'damo shel par. He agrees with Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, befar v'afilo b'damo shel par. And Rabbi Yitzchak is Mekel, he agrees with Resh Lakish. You see, this is ongoing machloket. Now, a question on the second opinion that says it would be allowed. We have a challenge. Itibe, Rabbi Ameh, the Rabbi Yitzchak napacha. So right, Rabbi Ameh is who said that it's no good is asking a question to Rabbi Yitzchak and say as follows: Nimnin umoshchin yedehen mimenu ad sheyishachet. This is a question from Korban Pesach. Regarding Korban Pesach, you have to join a group, right? You have to register and say, I'm with this group. This is going to be my Korban Pesach. You have to register. Now, if you want to change, you change your mind. Oh, no, my friend is with that group. I want to change. I want to go with them. You can do that until the time of slaughtering. Right? Once the Korban Pesach is slaughtered, then that's it. You can't change anymore. That we know is the halacha. Now here's the question: if you think that it's the blood that matters, and the sprinkling of the blood, so according to that, then it should be you can change groups until the time of sprinkling, because the shechita doesn't matter who did shechita. You did shechita, okay, so what? I'm going to go to them. They already did shechita. It's okay. I'm going to transfer to groups because they didn't do zedikah yet. So according to you, why don't you say that? And so he's comparing the korban of the pod of the Kohen Gadol to korban Pesach. So the answer is Shane Atam Dichtib Miyot Miseh Mechiyute Deseh. Don't bring me korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is an exception because the pasuk says, remember, if the house is too small for one seh, right? So then you bring the next house over and you join in. So it's talking about joining in to register for one seh, and the he and het are sometimes interchangeable. They sound similar, they look similar. So instead of reading it mihiyot, we say michiyot miseh. That has to be alive, like chayim. So the point is, you're only allowed to join when the animal is alive. Once you do shechita, that's no good. So that's a special reading, a derivation that we have for Korban Pesach. Only Korban Pesach, but don't give me that, bring me that as a source for anything else. Okay, so he dodged that question, but not done yet. We have another question on that opinion. Metiv mor zutra. ואין פה דין לא בעגל ולא בחיה ולא בשרוטה ולא בטרפה ולא בכליים ולא בכוי, אלא בשה. Okay, here's a statement that because we read it every day, that you have a petet hamor, right, a firstborn donkey, you can't offer it as a sacrifice. Instead, you have to redeem it with a seh, with a sheep. So this Baraita says it has to be a sheep. You can't give me a calf. But that's of a cow, a big animal, no good. And not a chay, can't bring me a deer, and not a shechuta. That's the key for us. Not a lamb that you already killed, no good. Yeah, when you redeem it, you have to do it for a live lamb. So that's where the question is from. And not terefa, not if it's going to die and has a disease, and not kilayim, something that's from a mixture of two animals, and not bekoi. Koi is something that we're not sure, is it a behema or is it a haya? Ella has to be a seh and has to be alive. So see here, it has to be alive. So maybe we can learn from here also a proof that It has to be alive, and that would be a challenge also to the lenient opinion. Answer: Shanei Atamdi Alif Se Mi Pesach. Oh no, we learned. Remember, they're actually back to back, and the Se in both. So just like Pesach has to be a Se and it's alive mechiyuteh, so we do a gezer hashava, and we say that pigeon Hamor also has to be alive. But the exception, and don't bring me that, it's not a proof that the part of the Kohen Gadol also has to be alive. Now, hold on. Now, you have to be careful what you wish for. Now, you made a gezerah between Korban Pesach and the pigeon Hamor. So maybe you'll say, bring everything, all the laws. Just like Korban Pesach has to be male and 1 year old. So too, when you're redeeming the chamor, it has to be a seh that's also zachar and 1 year old. Do you think that? Nobody. That's not the halacha. So what are you going to do about that? So he says, I have the word tifteh. Tifteh beseh, tifteh tifteh. Actually, it's 3 times here. But no, the first 2 are the ones that are relevant for chamor. The last one is for a person. So since it says tifteh twice, that's coming to include more. You can redeem it. So, in other words, you're right. I'm going to learn it from Pesach. From Korban Pesach, what I'm learning is that these other things aren't allowed. I can't use any of these shechut. Has to be a seh. But if you think that now I'm going to compare it totally and say it has to be a seh, has to be zachar and tam, no, tifteh comes to be more inclusive. So it does have to be a lamb, but doesn't have to be a male and 1 year old. Now question, once you have an inclusive word, maybe you should come and include everything, all the things on this list, including something that was shechuta, right? And how do you know that you should not include that and compare it to Korban Pesach? Like, how do you choose what to include and what not to include? Imken se maya. Yeah, the word se, what do you need with that? If you're going to include everything, so what do you need the word se? Because you're including all things that are not a se. Aigel, haya, right? So it's clear that the word se is coming to limit. Tifteh is coming to expand. That's not only Zachar and Ben Shana, but the point for us is that se does say it has to be one that's alive, just like Korban Pesach. So in conclusion, the Korban Pesach and the pigeon Hamor are exceptions that it has to be alive, and that leaves the question still standing: the pod of the Kohen Gadol, does that have to be one that he brought while it was alive and does shechita, or is it okay if someone else did shechita, because all he has to do is bring the blood, that the blood is the only important thing? So we still have the question open, and the next stuff we'll try a few more ways to settle the dispute. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.